Okay, now we are recording. All right. Well, thank you guys again for being here. We're so happy to have you all. I think you guys all know us by now, but we'll go ahead and do our introductions anyway. I'm Alison Lindsey, mental health specialist with SELPA.
And I'm Rosie Bucio, the behavior specialist with SELPA.
And then Laura, if you want to introduce.
Hi, I'm Laura Maurizio. I am the intern at SELPA this year.
Thanks, Laura. All right, guys, without further ado, we're going to get things started. One important announcement, though, before we do, is that I know that you guys signed up for the G.R.O.W Summit, and it was a 2-day training. So there's 2 hours today, and then 2 hours we're going to do next Monday. However, given that we know that things are crazy and that there's no ideal time during the day for staff to attend these, we decided to just consolidate. So everything is going to be consolidated into today. So yay, like you don't have to be here next Monday from 1 to 3. So don't worry about that. I will still keep that time blocked off if you guys want to come and like participate. See, this is weird. Like if you want to come participate in just like kind of reflecting upon what we talked about and like how is this going to like apply in the classroom, what does this look like, or really just anything related to G.R.O.W, I'll still be here from next Monday from 1 to 3. If you want to come do that, you're more than welcome to. All right, so for today, let me make this smaller. For today, what we're going to talk about first is we're going to review the data from this year. So we want to really thank you guys so much for all the work you put in terms of entering the data, because we had our weekly surveys, our quarterly surveys, and then the DESA information, which a lot of teachers inputted, as well as support staff and instructional assistants. So we want to be very thankful for all of you guys for doing that work. And we want to show you that it goes to good use, that like we are actually using this data, and hope in years to come to be able to replicate this data moving forward so that we can see the areas that maybe we're doing pretty well in, and then some areas that we'd also like to make some that we need to focus on and see more growth in. So it does go to good use. So Laura's going to review that for us. And then the second thing we're going to talk about is really just the expectations of the G.R.O.W framework in general, and kind of like what is the G.R.O.W framework, and what are the expectations of it. And then with our third topic, we'll be talking about the G.R.O.W culture. So the culture that we want to create within G.R.O.W, within our classrooms, amongst staff, as well as amongst students. And then we'll talk about what's in store for next year. So the future of the G.R.O.W model for the next school year. All right, I'm going to start you off with a quote, which I heard, and you guys are going to hear a lot about today, is Brene Brown, if you guys are familiar with her work. But Rosie and I both been kind of devouring a lot of her content recently. And this was a quote that she actually shared on one of her podcasts recently. And it just really, I was like, gosh, that's so true. And it's so what the G.R.O.W model is about as well. So it says, in the past, jobs were about muscles. Now they're about brains, but in the future, they'll be about the heart. And I thought that was just like a very grounding quote for us, because, you know, of course, we're all thinkers and want to be able to apply our knowledge, but that really it being about the heart just really resonated with me a lot.
And I think that this is true across professions, not just in the world of business or technology, but, you know, especially in the world of education. And so, and it makes it harder because when we make it about, you know, the heart, that we so desperately want those recipes. We'll talk about that a little bit later, but we want those recipes of, if we follow this, then we're going to be, you know, absolutely guaranteed to have this response. And when we're really working on matters of the heart, which our students in our ED programs so desperately need us to focus on, it's much harder than that.
Well, I think it lends itself to more connection, and therefore with that lends itself to a lot of vulnerability, like opens a door to vulnerability. And we're going to go into that in a lot more detail today. But that's really where the real work of it is. So our first topic is going to be the data review. So I'm going to let Laura take over on that. And Laura, you can just let me know when to progress the slides, okay?
Okay, sounds good. So before we jump into all the numbers and the graphs, We mentioned it once, but honestly, thank you so much for all of the hard work you've done this year, specifically with the data, because without everything that you've done every week, we wouldn't have a bigger picture of what's going on. So all the things you do with the data are really helpful, not only for us to help figure out where G.R.O.W might need some support or where we can improve, but my hope is that eventually, as we get into the practice of contributing to the information we have on growth through these data, you can see your own progress over time and feel more of an investment in the process. So it might seem like a little kind of nebulous right now to you because you've just been inputting information and not really seeing where it's going. So I'm hoping that through this presentation, you can get a better idea of what we've been using it for and look at the areas that we've been looking into. You can go to the next slide, Alison. So we did a weekly monitor and a quarterly survey this year. So educators in each of the G.R.O.W classrooms were asked to input data once a week into our weekly monitor. And that was the 4 questions that just asked which CPS strategies you were using, if there were any BERs or holds, and then you had a chance to elaborate on areas that you needed support. So our response rate for that was about 43%, which is not the majority. However, it's actually higher than most response rates in general in the field. So the average response rate is somewhere around 20%. So wonderful job, because we more than doubled that for the weekly. And then we did even better on the quarterly. So the quarterly survey we did 3 times this year. We did it once in December, once in February, and then we just did it again in April. And that was more of the information around the adverse childhood experiences and the systems factors. And then just like your stress levels and implementation of strategies. So I'll break that down a little bit moving forward, but just thank you for filling those out, because the response rates were actually really great and provided us with a lot of great information.
And then I want to have a giant like asterisk that it's really important for us to remember this was all done during a pandemic. And even next year, like those of you who've heard me say this, you're going to be like, oh, this is ad nauseum, but I'm going to say it over and over again until we all start believing it. But in December, I got to go to a CDE training, and they talked about that they're looking at the recovery being a 2-year process. So CDE is literally saying a 2-year pathway to recovery. That's what they're calling the recovery in education from the pandemic. And so it's really important that we like keep emphasizing that to ourselves, to our teams, to recognize that this is what we were able to do when within a handful of months, our entire educational system got turned upside down. And so this is huge. And so it's a good thing. It's something that we should be celebrating. And so thank you again.
Yeah, thank you for that, Rosie. I always forget the asterisk. Yeah, kind of a big asterisk.
That kind of qualifies all of our data too, because you're going to see as Laura presents on this data that like moving forward in years to come, this data set is going to have that big asterisk on it because we've been in virtual instruction for the majority of the year. Like the second quarterly survey, we know the response rate was a lot lower because that was when we were coming back in person. So, you know, we didn't want to completely overwhelm our teams by making sure we get that done. We know there's a lot more pressing matters happening. So yes, this year will be definitely qualified.
For sure. Awesome. So the first figure that we have is our implementation of CPS across the county. So these are the collaborative and proactive solution strategies. So those are things like changing the lens in which we view behavior. So seeing behavior more as communication, which we'll go into a little bit more in depth after the data, but just the use of changing our lens, doing things like assessments of lagging skills and unsolved problems, prioritizing problems, Plan B conversations, Plan C. So all of those aspects of the trainings that we've been engaging in all year, or maybe just starting to engage with, or maybe have yet to engage with, all of that's fine. We were just kind of tracking trends over time. So the blue column is the data that we collected from the first quarterly survey, and the May column is the data after we had done all 3 quarterly surveys. So there was a 17% increase in uptake of use of CPS strategies. So that was pretty cool. Despite all of the cards being stacked against us with distance learning and rolling back into in-person learning and doing a blend of all of this, we managed to somehow practice more strategies by the end of the year. So that's great. Alison, you can go to the next slide, please. So this is a breakdown of that overview, and these are the average percentages of time that each CPS strategy was used between January and May. So even though there was an overall trend of more CPS strategy infusion into the day, in general, we saw more specific strategy use earlier in the year than we did later in the year, and that could be a product of many things. It's just an observation. It's not good or bad. There's no judgment attached to it. In January, we were at pretty much higher levels of all of these strategies, and it decreased a little bit in May. But I think the general takeaway here is that the strategy most people are accessing is changing the lens through which we view student behavior, which is where we all need to start. So I think it's great that the majority of us are kind of trying to really examine the narratives we have and how we're viewing our kids and how we're viewing our role in the classroom. And then also kind of experimenting with the later skills as part of CPS, like Plan B, Plan C, and the ALSUPs. Definitely lower ALSUP creation than Plan B conversations, which doesn't necessarily make total sense. We would hopefully be making ALSUPs before we have the Plan B conversation. So what that communicates is that in January, maybe we had less understanding of the order of operations of CPS and how it actually looks procedurally, but those numbers got a little bit closer together by May. So they're still discrepant, and I think it still indicates that we need to provide some more support around exactly how we walk through CPS in action and just practicing all of those skills and then in order. But in general, trending in the right direction in terms of their relation to one another.
And I just want to add that this data is where we would expect it, right? So there's no expectation for there to be fidelity in using CPS. And in fact, Dr. Ross Green, the developer of CPS, talks about how the first couple of years they really spend on that lens shift. And that, you know, it doesn't matter how small or how big, you know, the different sites and districts are, that the biggest bulk of those first 2 years is helping reestablish how the narrative about behaviors and the responses that would accordingly go to, you know, the strategies that we're using. So that to me says, okay, we're in a very similar track, just like, you know, the developers are reporting out their sites. So this is good.
And I would say, just to drive home in the lens shift piece, you know, when we say that, we're talking about the theme of kids do well if they can. So, and when kids aren't doing well, it's because they don't have the skill set to meet the expectations that are being put on them. And then that's what we have to work on the skill building, right? So that's what we're talking about when we speak to the lens shift. And so just like Rosie said, like, this is to be expected, like completely okay. We know that it's going to take time, quite a bit of time, years, to really for us to become fluent in these strategies ourselves, and then for staff to become more fluent in them too. So we're happy with where things are, and really grateful that for you guys that are just open-minded and willing to learn this information. We know that it's takes time.
Thanks, guys. You want to head to the next one? Thanks. So this was just tapping into how well people thought they were understanding the brain states and the corresponding coaching strategy. So in general, the two columns on the left, the blue and the green, are our understanding of the three brain states between January and May. So our understanding as a whole of the brain states increased. So the 7 and 7.25 are out of 10. 0 means I don't understand the brain states at all. 10 means I completely understand the brain states. So we were at a good level in January by halfway through the year, but we increased understanding a little bit more between January and May, which is great. And then those corresponding coaching strategies, it's on that same scale of 0 to 10, 0 being I don't understand the corresponding coaching strategies at all, 10 being I have complete understanding. And we did see growth between January and May. In general, those two columns are a little bit lower than the understanding columns, but that's exactly what we would expect because the corresponding coaching strategies are building upon the foundation of understanding the three brain states. So you can't do the corresponding coaching strategies if you don't have a really solid understanding of the brain states. So this looks exactly like how we would expect it to look. And I think it's really encouraging information that we're changing the way we talk about changing the lens for CPS, but just in general, changing the way that we think about how we're viewing behavior and how we're reacting to it and supporting it. So yeah, interesting stuff. So this is just some descriptive information on behavioral incidents throughout the county. Interestingly enough, we've had 0 CBI holds, BERs, or expulsions reported, but that's also because we were in distance learning for most of the year. So I would say that these data will likely not look the same as we return to fully in-person for next year. So just kind of an acknowledgement that this year was very special and very unique, and that this is not what we would typically expect to see. And only seeing a de-escalation being reported about 14% of the time. So just interesting stuff.
Yeah, again, why this data is going to have a big asterisk on it for years moving forward.
So this was a question that we asked on our quarterly surveys about teachers' impressions of progress towards IEP goals. And we broke it down by academic IEP goals and social emotional IEP goals. So on the left side, all the bars are the time that we got the information. So the top 2 bars are from the first quarterly survey, the middle 2 bars are from the February survey, and the bottom 2 bars are from the May quarterly survey, blue being academic IEP goals, green being social and emotional IEP goals. In general, in November, in the beginning of the year, we were seeing more progress made towards social and emotional IEP goals, and then it kind of flipped to being just about even, honestly, but a slight lead with academic IEP goals. And this is on a scale of 0 to 4. So 0 would be your kids are making as a whole no progress at all, and 4 would be extraordinary progress. So I think the fact that any progress was made at all this year is a huge accomplishment, and the fact that it's on the higher end of the scale is really incredible. And what I really liked about this piece was that it was the teacher's impression. So a lot of the times we get stuck kind of in like the data-based, procedurally based IEP data, and it's nice to get an impression of progress from the adult in the room who works with the kids most. So I liked this information. So thank you for contributing. You can move on, thanks. So this piece all came from the DESA assessment. So the DESA, just to give an overview if anyone's not familiar with it, the DESA is a rating of social and emotional growth, and it is filled out per child. So each teacher filled out their DESA for every single kid in their classroom, and they did this once in the winter and then once last month. So it was quite an undertaking because for the elementary kids, I believe there's 72 questions per kid, and for the high school kids, there's about 40 or 43. So it's quite a lot of questions to go through, but because it's so much information, it gives us a really nuanced perception of social and emotional growth across 8 different areas that map onto the CASEL social and emotional learning framework, which is kind of regarded right now, at least, as one of the gold standards of social and emotional learning and kind of how we should be mapping on. So we have information for each program on the DESA based on their classroom and their specific set of kids. But what this information is providing is our program level information. So this is the weighted average of all of our K-8 schools and all of our high schools and all of G.R.O.W together. So in general, for the K-8 schools that completed the evaluations for the winter and the spring, we didn't really see any change. Those kids stayed in the 16th percentile of overall social emotional ability. And that 16th percentile is of the normative population, meaning that it's compared to all kids. So this isn't specifically normed to kids with emotional and behavioral challenges. This is for all of the kids. So we're really looking at the differences between the 2 percentiles rather than taking the percentile as our main metric. So in general, K-8 schools, there's no real difference according to the average between winter and spring, which, like the previous themes, I actually think is a success that we were able to maintain a level of social and emotional skills for those students. For high schools, we had almost twice as many kids, and we saw some progress there from the 12th percentile to the 18th percentile, which is pretty significant. And then all of G.R.O.W, when you kind of weigh the amount of students in each program and then merge them together, we saw an overall increase from the 13th percentile to the 17th percentile. So I am really encouraged by these data. I think they provide a nice complement to all of the traditional procedural data that are being collected for G.R.O.W kids and all the academic data that we focus on, not us, but programs specifically. It's nice to kind of be able to provide this complement programmatically. And I'm looking forward to seeing the data in years to come with DESA, because I think we'll see more and more growth, and I think it'll look a little bit different as we have full-time in-person year after year. So you can keep going, Alison. So this piece was collected from the quarterly surveys, and these are the adverse childhood experiences. And we also had some more systemic factors we've woven in through those ACEs, but basically why this is important before I go into the details is ACEs are factors that kids may or may not go through or encounter in their life. And the more ACEs we have, or the higher our ACEs scores, the higher likelihood it is that we'll have more challenges in navigating life across our lifespan. So it's true for predicting outcomes, not just in childhood, but for our whole life. So it's important to kind of know what we're contending with in our student population, and knowing what we can expect is a little bit clearer when we can contextualize it based on what these kids are going through or what they're dealing with, because they bring that into our classrooms every day. So what the purpose of collecting this information was to see what kind of issues are most prevalent in our G.R.O.W population with our kids. And in general, 62% of classrooms reported chronic stress related to issues outside of school. And a close second was chronic stress related to academics. And I think just the fact that there is a chronic ongoing stressor in these kids' life is really important to keep in mind, because stress affects so much of our behavior. It can affect our physical health, our mental health, our emotional health, our relationships. It's kind of ever permeating. So just knowing that the overwhelming majority of our kids are dealing with chronic stress, either related to academics or something else, kind of helps us better understand where they're coming from and where we're meeting them when they walk into our classroom. In addition, some of the most heavily loaded factors in G.R.O.W classrooms across the county were dealing with parental separation or divorce, substance abuse in the household, emotional neglect, poverty, homelessness or housing insecurity, food insecurity, community violence, medical crises, and there's a long list that keeps going. So I put some more factors on the side, but in general, like when we look at some of these, what stands out to me is just what are kids coming to the table with and how is that affecting their behavior and just like their understanding of relationships. And even things as basic as housing and food can prevent kids from accessing their learning, whether that's emotional learning or academic learning. It's definitely a barrier. And when you consider that most G.R.O.W classrooms have about 8 of these happening simultaneously, it's even more on these kids' plates and on the plates of the teachers. And then when we looked into what percent of G.R.O.W kids are directly impacted by any of these issues, it's 82%. So the overwhelming majority of kids are dealing with at least one of these issues. And I think it's discouraging in a way because there's not much that we can do about the systemic stuff. But I think it's encouraging because if we're aware of these factors, we can provide a place in our classrooms where we can rehabilitate and we can rewrite the narrative of relationships. So it's important to know. It's not the most happy information, but it's certainly helpful and it's a step in the right direction if we just become aware.
I think, Laura, you said something that was really important. It provides context, right? Because these are things that are all operating underneath the surface. So Alison, those of you who were here last year saw that really cool iceberg image that she made, and we have some things we'll talk about that. But these are all the things that are underneath the surface that we don't have direct access to and that our kids not necessarily are disclosing, and rightly so. But if we have this context, if we have this information, then we do understand, okay, this is why adding on these demands for accessing education in a specific way is incredibly difficult. And then Shalani was saying it helps change our lens. It does. If we understand these are the factors that the majority of our students on a day-to-day basis are coming to the table with, then it can absolutely help us as the grownups realize, this is why we have to do things in a very new way, and really push ourselves to learn from our own default settings.
Well, and I think it's operating from a place of trauma-informed care too, and like Shalani said, that lens shift, because we're moving from a place of like, what's wrong with you? Like, why are you acting this way? Or why aren't you responding to these interventions that we've been trying to do and you're just not getting it? To what happened to you. And I don't know if any of you guys have heard that Oprah Winfrey and Dr. Bruce Perry just put out a new book that's called What Happened to You, actually. So if you want to read more about this and trauma-informed care, I would definitely recommend that book, because Dr. Perry's a leader in the field of trauma work. And now, along with Oprah, is like using her platform to kind of bring all of this information to a wider population. And I was just listening to a podcast this morning on the way to work about this, and they were saying how so when we see behaviors like, and we find out more what happened to you, we're curious about that. We get to know our kids, we talk with our kids, we create relationship. It should be expected that, of course, this is what you're going to struggle with, like naturally, given all these things that happen to you in your experiences growing up or in utero or whatever it may be. Like, yes, one would struggle. It's just a biology, right? It's not a choice. So that's why we find this information to be really important. And like, again, Shalani said, is because of that lens shift and always coming back to this place when we feel discouraged, right? And reminding ourselves that these kids have a lot they're contending with. All right. Well, thanks so much, Laura. I really appreciate that presentation of the data. Does anybody have any questions on the data? Anything that we talked about so far? Nothing? Okay.
Thank you again, everyone. That was like, it would literally be impossible to get all that information and share it and use it to inform G.R.O.W without your participation. So thanks.
And I think that it's really important for us to remember that we're not just Santa Barbara County working on this. This is a task that across the state, but across the nation, we're trying to learn how to meet the needs of our most fragile students. So this data is actually part of a bigger network that we're all contributing to. So, it may oftentimes feel like, we're in a silo, or we're just off here by ourselves struggling and feeling like we're not really making headway. But all of our information, all of our data, all of our contributions to trying to learn more and meet the needs of our students actually is informing an entire system. And so to me, that reminds me, okay, this isn't just about me in this moment. This is how I am trying to also like improve systems of care for our students. And so that's what this data also gets to be shared too.
So thank you, guys. If you ever have any questions or feedback on it for us, please don't hesitate to reach out. You can throw a chat right now. You can always unmute yourself, or you can just shoot us an email or a text. We always appreciate your feedback. So now we're going to shift gears a bit, and we're going to talk about the expectations of the G.R.O.W program. So I put in here that and this is really an overhaul of how we perceive and respond to behavior. This is what G.R.O.W is really all about. So we're really challenging all of our default narratives. I wanted to introduce this idea because we know that when people come to training, sometimes you come and you're like, okay, I'm going to learn a certain skill, right? And then I'm going to be able to apply this tomorrow. I'm going to get some kind of a recipe of what to do when something happens. You're going to tell me this is what's going to happen. This is how you need to respond. And then I'm going to go put that into practice, right? It's just not that easy, unfortunately, with G.R.O.W and with supporting our population, because we're dealing with human beings, right? So we want to just name this right now as we move forward, and that what G.R.O.W is really this overhaul of how we perceive behavior and how we respond to the needs of our students. So it's really examining our default lens of how we were raised, what culture we came from, what our upbringing was, how we were parented, what our school system responded to our needs when we were growing up. That all shapes our default system as to how we parent, how we operate within our classrooms, right? How we support our students, and being more aware of that, and shifting to more of this G.R.O.W lens, this trauma-informed wellness therapeutic lens. So what G.R.O.W is not is, like I said, this recipe list of strategies that's really going to suddenly transform our students' behavior, you know, because I think that of all of you are so invested in here because you care about kids, right? Like we all care about kids and we all care about improving their quality of life and educating them, right? So we want to be able to do that. And yet we don't have like the magical pixie dust that we can just sprinkle and make their behaviors go away like that in order to be able to do those things we want to do, right? In order for you able to get an academic lesson done. You know, I know Rosie and I get questions, and I'm sure this is, you guys are going to relate, but like we get questions from staff all the time. We're like, yeah, that sounds good. But like, what can I do right now that's going to stop this behavior? Right. And we wish we had that, you know, capability. And that's just not reality, right? We don't have magical interventions that are all of a sudden going to change our behavior. I mean, I wish that was true, because then I'd be exercising every day and eating super healthy all the time if I knew what that magical intervention was, you know.
So Alison, may I ask?
Yes.
So then how, and I've seen, and Rosie's helped rewrite goals, for instance, and we've incorporated the language of the G.R.O.W mindset in those goals. So does that also now change how we write our BIPs and everything else?
Yeah, definitely.
Because that's what I'm hearing. I'm hearing that it's it's not just boilerplate.
No, it's not. And it's not like we keep going back to that recipe. It's not, you know, a specific recipe that we, you know, that decision tree that if you have this, all you have to do is add this and this, and it's going to be taken care of. Because the hard truth, Dr. Dan Siegel talks about like named attainment. And part of it is our own stress cycles are constantly activated because we feel like we're not meeting expectations of having our students meet their academic goals and move forward and, you know, meet those IEP goals. So that does mean that we have to re-examine all of these things. How are we writing our IEP goals that are able to meet the existing needs of our students at the time, not forever, but at this time. And then especially with our BIPs. Right. And so the great thing about everything we're doing in the G.R.O.W framework is it's very consistent, like with, you know, what, you know, even though we don't necessarily love the CPI terminology, it's very consistent with the direction that CPI has evolved in. It's consistent with everything that CDE is evolving with. And so, but this is part of us learning how to do that. And it's hard. It's not easy. And there isn't, even though we have a manual, no, there isn't an instructional manual that says, if you do this exactly like this, you are guaranteed within 3 months to have your student fully accessing academics and completely be self-regulated, because humans aren't that simple. We're complex creatures with complex systems. And that, you know, we try to, there's this like over need to oversimplify things. And the reality is that this is all complex. We can't overly simplify. So I guess that was a very long answer to say, yes, we have to all work together to learn how to rewrite our BIPs to reflect what we're doing with our students.
And those are things, Debbie, that we're always talking about and that will come in time. So I think, you know, we'll come up with like a goal bank of, you know, for G.R.O.W kids. Like there's some ideas that we have that in the future we would love to add on and be resources for our teams, and eventually have a BIP that is more aligned with the G.R.O.W framework and this therapeutic wellness model. So those would be things to come. Yeah. Thank you. That's a great question and observation. So along these lines, I wanted to just give you guys these definitions of different types of social emotional learning. So again, just to kind of ground us in what G.R.O.W is. So G.R.O.W, there's something called the prescriptive social emotional learning content, which is really, I'm not going to read these for you verbatim. You can go ahead and take a look, but that's really where you're going to get like step-by-step instruction. That's where you are going to get this recipe card of like, what exactly do I do? Like if any of you guys that have used like the second step, you know, model, or if you use the Mind Up book, right? There's like prescriptive lessons that it gives you, and they're very sequential in order, and it almost tells you verbatim, like, this is exactly what you do and this is exactly what you say, right? And the benefits of that is that there's a standardized delivery, so everyone's doing the same thing, and you can see better quality implementation because it's so scripted and predictable. And then you also have a really ease of measurement, like, are we doing this or are we not?
Yeah.
Right? So those are the benefits of prescriptive SEL. And then with universal SEL, this is where you see more of that emphasizing choice, flexibility, people taking, like, learning the material and taking ownership of it and really making it their own. So they learn the foundational principles, and then what does this look like in our environment, right? With our staff, with our kids. And the benefit of that is that you get really this comprehensive kind of integrated approach that helps children and adults to, like, master their problems and be able to enhance that those interpersonal relationships and problem solving, right? So there's benefits to both. And
can I add something?
Yeah.
So the way I see the prescriptive SEL is like, okay, I come in and I'm going to do this mind up exercise with them, or the growth mindset coach, book that we had issued out during the 2019-2020 calendar year. Oh, this is a lesson I'm going to do. And I know what materials, I know what's the key concepts that I'm trying to, like, facilitate. But then the universal SEL is really me as a human being, as a grown-up, and I'm coming in under the BCBA, role, how I'm actually literally living, breathing, and incorporating SEL into my practice and into the way that I interact with the students and the staff in that, microsystem and in the bigger system. So how am I looking at supporting the student right now during this de-escalation process, but also coaching the staff, right? And so it's really, like, I think the word that I keep seeing in this definition is the prescriptive is more like the how-to, and then the universal is I'm integrating this into who I am and how I practice as a professional. Mm-hmm. And that takes time. It absolutely takes time. Any other thoughts?
No, that was great. I think this next slide kind of goes to the next thought, is like, so what does GROW, right? Like, where does GROW fall? Mm-hmm. And so we really do see GROW as an SEL program, but we're not district-wide or campus-wide, right? We have these more contained classrooms, but we're really a program or framework within a classroom setting that's guided by foundational principles, skills, and classroom structures with some prescriptive components. So, using some of those curriculums like Second Step or Mind Up, or some of the other growth mindset resources that we've provided. So there's some prescriptive, but really what we're wanting to convey is that how these foundational principles are, how the trauma-informed information, the brain-based information, so that we can really skill up our staff in terms of understanding those concepts. And then how do you apply that in the day-to-day, right? So how is that infused in everything we do throughout our day, right? So it's not just about the delivery of these lessons.
It's not just about, like, sustained silent reading is at 9:10 and SEL is at 10:15. Right. This is, very much, again, those of you who've been around for a while, like, PBIS efforts, MTSS, this is an entire, like, shift. And we'll talk about the culture in a little bit. That is, okay, this is just how we live and breathe, supporting our students through, their emotional and behavioral cycles.
All right, so I wanted to put this visual up here for you guys. I just called it the lay of the land because of the picture, but also just really, this is the lay of the land with GROW. So if we're going to distill it, this is what we're looking at. So we see kind of on the surface, right? So we before had our iceberg image of, like, what's above the water, right? So if we see, like, our mountaintop here, that's what we see on the outside, right? So we see the behaviors of student, and that's really showing us that they have an inability to regulate their emotions, right? Which results in outward signs of distress. So whether that's externalizing behaviors or whether that's internalizing behaviors. So if that's lashing out or if that's shutting down, right? So that's what we're gonna see with our eyes. what is underneath the surface is the brain state, like what's going on internally, right, for that student. So that's something that we don't see with our eyes. So we're not able to observe this, right? So this is someone's inner state, but we can learn to recognize. So this is where when we're learning or we're watching those conscious discipline videos and talking about that, we're talking about our brain states and our coaching strategies. This is what we mean in terms of understanding, is that student right now, based on what I can observe, are they in their survival brain state, which meaning they're completely offline, right? Like, so we have to really adjust our expectations and basically have no expectations other than maintaining safety. Or are they in their emotional brain state? And then we have our connecting strategies that we use with that student. Or are they in their executive state and they're in a place where they can receive feedback, they can problem solve, they can access academic information, they can do things that maybe are really hard for them right now. We can try to practice those things, right? So that's what we don't see, the brain state, but this is where, as we learn more and we're open to kind of educating ourselves, we start to recognize more, right?
And this takes a lot of work. I can honestly, as just a single human being, I started working with Alison 7 years ago when SB Unified brought me in to support their junior high program. And in the last 4 years of shifting towards more of a wellness model, it's really only been this year, after doing this for 4 years, that I can actually say, oh, I'm getting it. Even today, as I was with a team who's here, we were in and out of supporting a student through a number of escalation cycles. And it was really this is one of the first years where in that moment, I'm remembering, okay, I need to breathe right now. I need to watch, how I'm responding. And I'm able to also see what's coming and recognize the needs of the students and the staff. And there's no shortcut to getting here. It is literally just practice and failing a lot. In a little bit, we'll talk about that. And really the only way to work through that failure is being vulnerable to own it and be yeah, I really probably should have done this, or I wonder how I could grow from this piece. But as humans, we're really optic creatures. We rely on those outward visible pieces. By the time we actually start seeing the visible pieces, it's too late. So that's why we have to really become well-versed in understanding the brain states, and even further beyond that, the trauma-informed information, all that data that, Laura just shared at the beginning of our training. If we're recognizing that 80+% of our students are coming with 6 or more of these ACEs every day, then we can just assume that the moment they walk into our classroom, they're in a stress cycle. That's a given. And if we're accepting of that and recognizing of that, then we're going to be able to see those soft signs that would be much easier to miss. Or even if we do miss them, then we'll be able to coach ourselves and be yeah, I missed it. It's okay. We know how to de-escalate and reestablish connection, and then we'll move on from there.
Yeah. Thanks, Rosie. So that's why I feel like this visual is just really helpful, because I think what we all see on the behaviors is that we all know that in a lot of, when we're on campuses, and we know that other classrooms are aware of that. I know Chantal, you were mentioning it, one of our high schools, they're really nervous having the G.R.O.W program on their site, right? Because they're seeing the behaviors, right? They're seeing what's visible on the outside. And they're not necessarily have adopted this lens shift and taking into account the basic needs of these students that haven't been met or are currently not being met, along with this trauma-informed lens. And understanding where their stress cycle is living, right? And what's contributing to that, and then being able to recognize their brain state and support them therefore appropriately, right? So this is really just kind of the lay of the land in G.R.O.W and the framework that we operate from, and how this informs how we support students on a day-by-day, minute-to-minute basis. Anybody have any questions or thoughts on that? All right. So some areas that we've really been focusing on and will continue to focus on with G.R.O.W, if we want to just kind of what are our main areas? How are we then helping our kids? right? So what are we doing? So we've been talking about these different aspects of the G.R.O.W model because we have, we'll go over this in the fall, the training of all the different components of G.R.O.W, but these are really the salient, like most important parts for us to focus on. So there's 3 of them. So the first one is the brain states and coaching strategies. So we're really wanting to focus with our teams on becoming skilled at identifying those different brain states that we just talked about, becoming skilled at identifying those in ourselves too. So it's not just in our students. We all operate the same way, right? We all have our own experiences that has led us to where we are and to who we are today. And recognizing that when a student is struggling, like we can get dysregulated, right? We're human. So noticing our own brain state, if we walk into the room and maybe we are coming into the classroom in an emotional brain state because we just had a rough morning, right? I know that happens to me sometimes, like with my kids, if they're struggling in the morning and my engine's already revving when I start out my day, it's just being conscious of that. Right? No judgment. Like there doesn't mean that we're doing something wrong. That just means that we're people and that happens. And so it's just being conscious of it and taking note of it, trying to get a pulse on where am I at? What are those feelings I'm experiencing right now? And use some of our coaching strategies to regulate. So in G.R.O.W, we call that like breathing and wishing well, right? So taking some of those deep breaths, working to re-regulate our physiology, and wishing ourselves well, like noting like I had a tough morning. It's okay that I'm having a hard time right now, right? And I'm going to take some deep breaths. I'm going to do what I can, drink some water, make sure I'm fed, make sure I have my breakfast in my system, and make that a priority to try to set up the rest of my day to go as smoothly as possible, right? And in those moments when we get triggered too, identifying that we're feeling that way and working to regulate ourselves. There's so much power in that because then we're able to better respond to our students' needs instead of like flying off the rails ourselves, right? Becoming more authoritarian. And I had another point there and I completely lost my train of thought.
I was just thinking of today, like in supporting the team that I was with today, there are multiple times where I was like, oh, ooh, this is getting hard. Okay, I'm having a hard time. I feel the authoritarian Portuguese Catholic nun coming out and I need to go to my G.R.O.W avatar. So I took some deep breaths. And then for me, I'm a doer. So like I just cleaned, you know, so I like picked up the dustpan and the, you know, broom, and I was just cleaning some things. And because to me, that's one of the ways that I regulate is I have to do things, and it's usually cleaning. And so then I came down from that and I was able to like connect with the staff and say, okay, yeah, I had a hard time of thinking how to redirect the conversation. But it was really also my own internal dialogue of, okay, this is hard and it's okay that it's hard. It's not going to last forever. Like just find something to like calm yourself down with and then come back. And then those all happen in a handful of seconds. And instead of myself going into an escalation cycle, I was able to keep myself calm and then able to coach the student and the staff. So that is part of that, really being aware of your own brain state so that you can model and, you know, coach at the same time.
That was the point that I was going to make, is that this is really foundational because it's so powerful because it's not, it helps us not only to help regulate our physiology so we can better support the staff and coach the students, but like Shalani mentioned, thank you, Shalani, I love you. You're like reading what's in my brain, is that it's great modeling for the student, right? If they can even see us taking deep breaths, and maybe they might be curious about that, or they may not even notice it on a conscious level, but on an unconscious level, our systems are communicating, right, through those mirror neurons. So they see us doing this and their body is responding to that. So they may then start adopting that. If we go take a drink of water, right, to help calm ourselves down, they still witness that, right? So it can be great modeling for them as well. Did you want to say anything more about that? Okay. So the next area of focus, and these are again for like years to come, is what we're going to be focusing on, is that CPS model. So the collaborative and proactive solutions model by Dr. Ross Green. And that's everything that we've talked about before when we were reviewing the data in regards to the lens shift. So kids do well if they can. And if they can't, that's because they don't have the skill set to meet the expectations in the environment. Right. So that's where we adjust expectations. And we do that by creating an ALSUP, an assessment of lagging skills and unsolved problem for that student, so that we as the adults can all get on the same page as to what are some things that we're really taking off the table, which with Dr. Green's model with CPS, we call that plan C. So a lot of us are starting to verb that, like use it as like we're plan C'ing that. Like even Laura and I talk about that just at work, like how Laura's prioritizing something. She'll say like, I'm plan C'ing these things. So what are some of those expectations we can take off the table for students? And then really focusing on that plan B. And again, guys, these terms are terrible. Like plan B and plan C, especially with high school students, we realize are like awful terms. So maybe in future years we can rename them and grow. But this is what it's called in Dr. Green's model. So plan B is really that collaborative conversation. So we prioritize what we're focusing on with that student, and we walk through that plan B conversation, which is very step oriented, that Dr. Green helps us to do, which is really trying to understand from the student's perspective what's getting in their way of being successful. Right? Because a lot of times we have our own adult theories and ideas about what's hard for this kid in terms of meeting a certain expectation. And then we apply a solution to that. And we often get it wrong. Very well intended, but we miss something. Right? So this is where we're really trying to get that student's perspective on the table. And then we also are able to share our adult perspective. So that requires the student to therefore take into somebody else's perspective and needs as well. And then we solve the problem together. We invite the student to like generate some solutions. So what are we going to do about this? Right? So that's when we talk about CPS model, it's all of those things. Right. And we hope that this is a model that will all just become more and more well-versed in over the years. So we know it's going to take time and it's a very different way of doing things, but eventually this is just going to be our practice. This is just going to be what we do, right? It's going to be second nature to us, but that's going to take years, and we recognize that for all of us.
Years.
And then the third one that we're putting in now is called the G.R.O.W family. So this is where we speak about creating a culture where everyone belongs. So how important it is to create this culture in our classrooms where there is no othering, right? Where if our friend, our student is struggling, we're not saying like, oh goodness, like he needs to go, right? He shouldn't be in here. Like this isn't safe. He's distracting from the learning of all the other kids. This isn't good. Where we create this narrative about that student that permeates the culture in our classroom, where therefore other students feel like, well, okay, I can't do that, or I can't struggle, right? But they're going to, right? So we all are going to have hard times. So we instead want to create this culture where everyone belongs, where yeah, our friend is struggling. What can we do? Like what's helpful in these moments? How can we support him? And a lot of times supporting him is just by taking a step back, right? Giving him some space. And how can we do that? What else can I go do right now while the staff helps him? Because that's what our teachers and our staff are here to do, is help support all of us. And right now he needs more support. And how can we wish him well in that, control our own physiology, and teach our kids to do the same, right? And create that culture where it's acceptable that like we all have a hard time sometimes, and we're all there to support each other.
And with the G.R.O.W family, this is kind of an automatic. I mean, most models for our students have like this, we have to have, a culture of acceptance. It is way easier to say that on paper than to do, right? And our students have been othered from the moment that they probably started in education. They were the ones who struggled. Especially if they were externalizers. They're suspended, they have detention, they get pulled out of recess, they're constantly having things taken away. You can't, go on this outing, or you can't go on this field trip, or, getting calls from families. Like the other day, I was with a student and I went to go, and he'd had like an up and down, like, day of escalation cycles. And he really worked hard to let us like coach him. And I was approaching mom, who's a high-end professional, and she literally looked petrified. Like I told Alison, she looked absolutely petrified that I was going to say that he had a horrible, rotten, no good day. And I'm like, hey, I just want to let you know that, Billy Bob, not his name, really, worked hard at letting us like coach and support him. And we know that this is hard. This is not an easy transition, but we just wanted you to know that he really worked hard with us today. And so we look forward to tomorrow. That was it. She's like, oh, thank God. I thought you were going to tell me that he couldn't come back tomorrow. I'm like, oh, no. And she's like, for all it's worth, he really is trying. I'm like, we know it. We know he's trying, And so Our students and their families have been othered forever. And we inadvertently other. Like when we say, oh my gosh, he was awful today. Look at that, how many times he scratched me. Inadvertently, like there's that fine line, and we'll talk about that in a little bit, like of venting and, you know, debriefing with each other versus we're othering our students, right? And so we have to be like super brave to have those hard conversations with each other when we start finding that, oh man, we're doing that. You know, we're using real pejorative ways to talk about their disruptive behaviors, but we'll talk a little bit more in a little bit.
And there are other aspects of the G.R.O.W family too. So these are things like creating rituals that we also speak to when we speak about the G.R.O.W family. And in our training in the fall, we're going to cover all of those. And then we'll also have the G.R.O.W manual, which is going to have all of this kind of content spelled out for everybody. But for today's sake, we know we're very time limited. So we're just giving you quick overviews of these, but these are our main focus areas. All right, so why don't we go ahead and take a little break?
Yeah.
So right now we're going to let's just take like a 5-minute break, and then you want to come back and do the brain break? Okay, so why don't we take a 5-minute break? You guys can just get up, move, use the restroom if you need to. And then we come back, we're going to do a little activity together, and then we'll launch into the rest of the content we have for you today. Okay, so we'll see you in 5 minutes, which will be, let's see, like 2:03.
Yep, perfect.
We'll see you at 2:03, very specific time.
Thanks, guys.
All right, thanks. All right, guys, we're gonna be getting going again here. So when you're ready, if you want to join us again, and Laura's gonna speak a little bit about brain breaks, and then we're gonna do a little exercise together, and then we're gonna move through the rest of the content and probably get done a little bit early today. So that's great.
Well, so I think everyone is slowly trickling back, but we'll do a brain break. And just to review for anyone unfamiliar, a brain break is something that we do in our G.R.O.W classrooms, and we can do throughout our day outside of the G.R.O.W classrooms for kids and adults alike. They're designed to be a break for your brain, and they're non-contingent, so they don't have to be earned. It's just whenever you need it, when you feel like you need it, you take a break and you do it to kind of reset and bring yourself back down, so you can better engage with whatever you are working on or trying to engage in. So there are many brain breaks that you can do, and you can create your own. There's no set of specific brain breaks, but we do have many available on the G.R.O.W website, and I will put the link in the chat if you're unfamiliar with the website or don't have the link. If you've never used the website before, just request an account and I can approve your account. But there's tons of materials on there specifically related to brain breaks and beyond. The brain break that we're going to do today is called box breathing. And I think this one is really cool because it's pretty accessible. You just need to be able to trace a box with your finger. And I think it's also really cool because it is used by the Navy SEALs. So they use this strategy to kind of bring themselves back down and relax and kind of relieve their anxiety when they're highly stressed out, because as I'd imagine, being a Navy SEAL sounds really stressful.
Super easy. Super easy.
So the way this works is you're basically going to draw a box in your mind. You could do it with your finger if you want, but when you go up the side of the box, you breathe in for 4 counts. Then you go across the box and you hold that breath for 4 more counts. Then you go down the box and breathe out for 4 counts. And then you trace back to the beginning of the box and you're holding the bottom of your exhale for 4 counts. So it's breathe in, hold, breathe out, hold, but slowed down. I'm gonna guide you along with my fingers. You don't have to keep your videos on if you're like uncomfortable for whatever reason. Just show up however you want to show up, and you can follow along. We'll go around the box 3 times. You can do this as many times as you'd like, whenever you'd like. So just keep that in mind. But for today, we'll do it 3 times. So I'm not going to be able to count while I'm breathing. If I could do that, that would be an incredible skill. I'd probably be a magician and not in the Zoom right now, but I will breathe and you can just follow my hands and try your best to follow along. So we'll start by breathing in for 4 counts. Okay. Good job, guys.
Thanks,
Nice.
Laura.
Thanks, Laura. I noticed that I was doing it in like 4 little increments too, and you were doing it too.
That helps. Yeah, it's so hard for me. I always have to remember to slow down. So like anytime I do a breathing exercise, the first leg I like rush through and I'm like, wait, this is meant to be slow.
Right. So these are all, thanks so much, Laura. So these are all strategies that we want to proactively teach to our kids, right? And to ideally do these when they're not, when a student isn't escalated. So trying to teach our kids to take a break, like maybe we're doing an academic lesson or a social emotional lesson, or we're playing a game. And we just say, hey, like, let's just take a really quick brain break and let's practice one of these, right? So that's where you can pull out one of these strategies. So that therefore that's a skill that we're starting to build those connections, those those pathways in our brains, right? Where we're gonna become more familiar with that strategy. So that way, when we need to rely upon that skill, when we're dysregulated, it's gonna be much easier for us to access that skill if it's something that's more integrated, right, into our being already, as opposed to if it's not and we're reactively trying to use a skill that we don't know, like that's near impossible for us to do. right? So we want to be incorporating these kind of brain breaks periodically throughout the day. So we practice. All right, I'm going to pull back up our PowerPoint again. Actually, I'm using G.R.O.W slides or Google slides. G.R.O.W slides.
Oh,
Maybe
Google
that'll be
slides.
a thing someday. Google slides. All right, here's another quote to ground us. I was telling you about my adoration for Brene Brown. So we have another Brene Brown quote here, which is, growth and learning are uncomfortable. So it's going to happen here. You're going to feel that way. It's normal and to be expected. You're not alone, and I ask that you stay open and lean into it. This is a quote from her book. I believe it was Dare to Lead.
Mm-hmm.
And this is where she talks about how she supports her own teams that she employs and that she works with, as well as she uses in all of the talks that she gives to these big organizations. Like she does a lot of coaching with like Fortune 500 companies. And she talks about how there's no growth without discomfort, right? So we know that in this lens shift with G.R.O.W, moving from this more traditional behavioral model to this therapeutic wellness model, that it triggers a lot of things inside of ourselves, right? I know for me, sometimes looking back on some of the work that I used to do 6 years ago, 10 years ago, I'm like, oh man, like sometimes I can be really hard on myself about that. Like given what I know now, I think like, gosh, I maybe did a lot of damage, and that triggers my sense of self. I start to question like, gosh, am I really good at what I'm doing? What am I doing? Right. And we start to kind of spin out our CD-ROM, like goes bonkers, right? And based on our own experience, that can go down different paths, but it makes us feel uncomfortable, right? So when we're being challenged, when we're trying to learn something new, it's challenging. And so we want to, again, like normalize that and recognize that we're going to have uncomfortable conversations, like with ourselves and with each other. Right. So there's going to be times where you're learning some of this content and you're like, man, I just don't agree with this, or this doesn't resonate with me, or it does. But then what does that mean about everything I thought was true?
Yeah.
Right. And we want to be able to normalize that we all do that and create a space where it's safe to talk about that. Right. That's not, and I think things are starting to slowly move here, but I think as a larger culture, we're very far away from that. But within G.R.O.W, within our programs, within our greater G.R.O.W community, we want to be able to normalize this idea and be able to create space where it's safe to have uncomfortable conversations. It's safe to say, like Rosie said earlier, like you always use the term, which cracks me up, and say like, man, I really screwed the pooch. Like, that's like
the worst
one
one
ever. Term, but you say that.
Yeah, I say
but saying that basically saying like I messed up, like I didn't get that right. And like we are not experts. Like we are absolutely not experts. We're learning. We're on this growth journey with you, right? And we're gonna make mistakes, and we're gonna have times where we reflect back on something that we did and thought like, man, I really was not kind of in tune with what was going on with myself, and I used an approach that was not the right way to handle that. And I'm aware of that. So like, okay, next time, what can I do differently? Right. And we can normalize those conversations within and amongst our staff so that it's safe to be able to do that, because that's how we're going to learn. Right. And we're going to create that safety and connection where therefore we can feel supported and we can feel like I'm not alone in doing this. And we can know that other people are going to help hold that for us and lift us up. Right. So that's what we're talking about in this next section.
Brianna, do you have a comment?
I had a question. You said that this is the same chick that does the podcast that you guys have been listening to?
Yeah.
What's the name of the podcast?
The podcast with Brene Brown. It's called
Dare to Lead.
Dare to Lead. Thank you, Rosie. Yeah, and it's on Spotify. Yeah, she just moved over to Spotify, but it's a great, she's a couple podcast. Oh, and Unlocking Us. That's actually the one I listen to more often from her. It's called Unlocking Us. It's a great podcast.
The line on this quote that I really anchor to personally is the lean into it, which is really counterproductive to who I am as a human being and how I think most of us operate. So most people at this, virtual table have done the activity where we talk about how often we practice our most difficult thing. And, and no matter where we are, whether we're in Carpinteria, San Ynez Valley, Santa Maria, Lompoc, Santa Barbara, Goleta, anywhere, it's adults really don't spend a lot of time doing their most difficult thing. We actively, magically as grownups get to do that. And we kind of orchestrate our lives to avoid doing those really difficult things. Like, I think there's not a single person in Santa Barbara County that doesn't know that I hate swimming in the ocean. Right. And I never practiced that once a decade. And as a result, I'm not any good. Like, I'm terrible. I would literally and figuratively drown. So this moving forward, if you walk away from anything today, and if you're looking at like, okay, what are we going to do? What are these two going to have us do at the G.R.O.W training starting in August? It's really going to be leaning into those hard moments. We as a community are going to have to make a total pact with each other that we're going to be brave. We're really going to be brave when things are hard, and that we're not going to always know the answer. Like, we may sit with a group of grownups, admin, teachers, school psych, the behaviorists, and be like, holy smoke, how are we going to help this student? And we all may have different viewpoints and ideas and suggestions, and we're going to have to be brave to be like, I like that idea, and I think that when we have this student more stabilized, we could reincorporate that. But right now, I think if we add that, we may end up creating more obstacles for ourselves. That's a hard thing to do, because we all care about each other. We don't want to like feel like we're questioning anyone else's contributions, but we're going to have to be brave. And we're going to have to be brave in saying, okay, now watch me for the next hour and a half as I like struggle. Like, take note of when you see me have the deer in the headlight looks, because then let's talk about it as a team afterwards. Let's share those moments where we're like, what do I say? How do I give this kid feedback without corrective feedback? How do I coach without saying the word no? Right? So I feel like if there's anything that we've talked about and learned from this year, is that we have to lean into the discomfort. And that is like the antithesis of who I am as a person. I have been, every fiber of me avoids difficult things, and yet life keeps putting me in situations. It's like, no, you're going to learn to lean into it, and you're going to learn to say, I'm scared, I don't know what to do, I'm overwhelmed, this is hard, and then you move on to the next day. Okay.
Thanks, Rosie. I'm going to share this slide with us. So this is more coming from Brene Brown's work as well. So there's no courage without vulnerability. So that's the big rub, right? Is that we all have to create this space where we ourselves can be vulnerable, and we also therefore allow those around us to be vulnerable, right? So there's some key anchors here, and Brene Brown has a lot more of these, but these were the three that Rosie and I found to be like the most salient when it or important when it comes to grow and us leaning into this, is moving from, and she calls this armored versus daring leadership. So armored meaning like we protect our heart, right? We put up that shield, we armor up. So we protect ourselves, and we feel like that's what we should be doing, right? That means we're strong, as opposed to actually the opposite, right? Which is wholeheartedness, or being open to not always getting it right. Right? To open to that vulnerability. So the first one is moving from being a knower and being right. So that armored up approach. So thinking that I know everything, I am an expert, and that I have to always get it right. Right? I always have an answer for you. Right? As opposed to moving towards being a learner and getting it right. Right? So leaning into things, being more curious. Right? And kind of staying curious a little bit longer. Like, I didn't really understand that, like, or I think I may have gotten it, but like, tell me more about that. Right. And so knowing that we're all in our journey throughout life, we're always learning, right? We always have more to learn. And so being open to that and being willing doesn't mean always agreeing. It just means being open. right? And getting it right, being able to sometimes apply these things, therefore, that we are learning.
It's the way I see this in application in our interactions with our students, is that being a knower and being right is, I'm the authoritarian, I'm the teacher, I'm the BCBA, I'm the grown-up, right? And I know what you need to do, and I know exactly how you're going to do it, when you're going to do it, at what intervals you're going to do it. Versus being a learner and getting it right is more of that collaborative piece of, okay, where are you and how are we going to help you? Right? So learning to learn with our students, because our students aren't going to be able to be like, well, magically, let me tell you exactly what's going on with me. Let me tell you what I precisely need. It's going to take an art form of getting to that place with our kids. And it's going to be us willing to admit, oh, I don't know what to do. So like, I'm going to try. And I'm going to keep trying, and we're going to keep trying. We're going to keep coming to the table, and we're going to pull our student with us into a collaborative process of learning and getting it right together, versus telling them what they need to do to be right. And that's a huge shift in education. That is not how any of us were educated, probably not how most of us were parented. And it's a hard one to let go of. I think that you want to add anything else?
Yeah, no, I think that's perfect. So this concept in the middle here, we kind of covered a little bit already, but this is from the armored leadership approach of kind of tapping out of hard conversations. So avoiding difficult conversations, which I mean, we're all guilty of at times, right? Is like, we don't want to offend somebody, or we don't want to make somebody else uncomfortable, or with our students, we're afraid to have more of a challenging conversation with them, right? Versus leaning into and skilling up for those hard conversations. And Rosie quoted earlier Dr. Dan Siegel, and that's really like naming it to tame it. And I feel like with this, the best thing to do is really to name that, like, this is hard. Like, we're going to talk about something right now, like, or in our team meetings, we're going to have hard conversations. Right. And that's to be expected. Like that quote from Brene Brown, it's kind of just using that same strategy of just naming it. Like, this is going to be difficult. It's going to require us all to be vulnerable, and own our own stuff, and kind of recognize it, and be open to receiving feedback. But we're working on skilling ourselves up for that. So learning how to keep grounded ourselves, and how to create that sense of safety amongst each other, that we're not in coming from a place of judgment. We're all recognizing that we're in this together, and we're all learning, and that we're doing the very best that we can with the skills that we have at the time, just like our students are. Anything you want to add on that? And then the last one is moving from a place of fostering a scarcity-driven culture. And I know you are very passionate about this one, so you can speak a little bit more on the scarcity-driven culture, to committing to and modeling that we are enough and that we have enough.
And I think that the reason that Alison said I've been very kind of big on the scarcity-driven culture this year is because if anything, the pandemic has highlighted all of the inequities that we have, and all the resources that we, are yearning to have in our own classrooms and with our students. And if only we had time to develop this skill, and if only we had these resources, if only we had, 2 more staff in here, then we could really do the, rigorous, support that we wanted to support our students. There's just, when you get wrapped up in all the things that we don't have and that should have, and why is admin not advocating for us, or the annoying lady in the registrar office won't accept these units. We get trapped in all of these things of what we don't have, that we then don't see what we do have and what we are accomplishing. So for me, one of the biggest ones this year was, I feel like we're just babysitting our kids. I just feel like we don't have enough time to develop, the individualized programs that we want. We just don't have enough time to prepare the materials, and we end up just feeling like we're babysitting our kids. And then when having, the brave conversations of saying, absolutely not just babysitting our kids. We're establishing what it means to honestly speak about when we're overwhelmed, This pandemic isn't just happening to students, it's happening to all of us, right? We all feel like we're having a hard time, but look at what we're doing. Our students show up every day. We're teaching students how to talk about things that are hard and uncomfortable. We're teaching our students how to problem solve and speak for themselves and say, this isn't working for me. My goodness, how many of us as grownups don't learn that until like in our mid 40s, after like midlife crises of like, being assertive and actually speaking for what we need. And so I think if we're really like, if anything to emphasize again in that being vulnerable next year is next year's going to be gnarly. If this last quarter has been gnarly, holy smoke, let's rip that Band-Aid off. And it is going to be insane. So let's just own it, but then own that, like, yes, we're not going to have all the staff training that we want. We're not going to even have the right staff ratio that we want. And we may not have the resources that we want or the admin that we really wish that would have our backs. But the reality is we're showing up for our kids every day, and we're showing up for kids that the rest of the school system and the society at large, including maybe their own family system, other all the time. So the fact that we do that means we are enough. And so we can speak to this at length, and we will in August, but I think that, Larice, what did you say? Sometimes we are just giving our students a safe place to escape the stressors from the outside. Yes, absolutely. And that is one of the most glorious things that we can give to another human being, and so we underestimate that power. But I think we get caught in that scarcity driven culture because we all want to do our jobs. None of us are here because like we're going to get rich, scheme out of public education. We want to do our jobs, which means we want to help students. We want to help students be prepared for their future and have the most optimal outcome possible. But life happens and factors come in. And so if we just anchor ourselves in that, the fact that we show up every day, and that it's hard to show up every day. Sometimes it's really hard, especially when our students are struggling day in and day out with major physical behaviors, and we ride it through with them. How many humans can say that, at the end of the day, I was accepted by adults when no one else would accept me? Good grief. What I want to be that person, even though at the end of the day, I'm totally fried. Now, usually Alison's my phone a friend. Oh, this was a hard day. I'm just cooked. Right. But the fact that I know that I get to be that person for a team member or for a student, man, that is enough. That makes my time on this earth really sacred versus just an endless struggle. Any thoughts? Anyone else? Okay.
This slide kind of elaborates a little bit more on this of like, how can we practice this and model this? So what are some actual ways to do this and create this in our GROW culture in our classrooms? So what are those things that we can do to promote this message and this foundation of like, we are enough and we have enough? So what we can do amongst our team members is like acknowledge, like Rosie was talking about, acknowledge those small successes and accomplishments, right? So acknowledge that you showed up today. Like maybe the whole day was a complete and total train wreck, but like you were there, you showed up, you rode through all those waves, you were there, right? Acknowledge those small successes. Like if we have shown incremental progress, right? And we notice that now this student isn't putting their head down, for 95% of the lesson, that now they took their hoodie off and they're like glancing at the screen from time to time, like that's progress, right? Mm-hmm. That's success. So we are seeing those successes. So we want to make sure we acknowledge those successes and not just note it to ourselves, but like share it with those around us, those observations that we're seeing, and acknowledge that. So, and then acknowledge and normalize fear and uncertainty. So name it, right? Again, name it to tame it. Name it that like sometimes I'm scared that I don't know what I'm doing. Like, and that terrifies me. We want to normalize that. We want to normalize not knowing and not having the answer all the time. Yeah. Right. And then also rewarding and respecting the boundaries of ourselves and of others, and rewarding and respecting self-care. So where that is part of our culture, where maybe I'm struggling and I'm noting that I'm kind of starting to go off the rails a little bit, and I'm going to that emotional brain state myself, and I'm able to tap out, right? I'm able to like give my other colleague across the room a little nod of like, hey, I need to step out for a minute. Right. And not having that be something where it's received with like an eye roll, right? But it's received with like absolutely, like, let me just go do this and then I'm going to run over there. Right. So that's something that amongst our staff, like we promote, we actually celebrate, we reward that and respect we're creating that space where that's safe to do. And again, this kind of translates to our kids too, where we think, well, gosh, if we start doing that all the time and giving staff permission to practice self-care, to go do something they need to do to take care of themselves, and then I need to step in or somebody else needs to step in. If I start doing that, then they're just going to start doing that more. Right. It's like that thing we think about with our students of like, well, if I give them an inch, they're going to take a mile. Right. And what we find, and what Brene Brown talks about actually that she finds in the research, is that that's just not true. Like actually what you see is the opposite. Where we can create this culture where this is safe to do, you actually see people stepping up to the plate more because they feel safer, they feel connected, they feel supported, and therefore they feel more the skill set and the ability to be brave, right? They feel like, okay, this is safe for me to practice something that I don't feel 100% confident in. And it's okay if I mess up and make a mistake, because all these people here have my back and they're all here to support me, and we're all going to learn from that and move forward. Right. So you actually see people step up more as opposed to start to check out more.
And that's the same thing with what the literature says with our kids. Like we did a training in the fall with Dr. Green, and someone was talking about how a team had said, well, if your plan's seeing like 90% of academics, won't they always like not want to do academics? And their research time and time shows, again, that's not the case. That once they stabilize as a little human, they're curious. Humans by nature are curious. Just think of those of you who had kids or worked with little tiny kids. Little toddlers are the most curious little creatures. And we, at our different developmental stages, we don't stop being curious. We stop showing our curiosity when we're scared that we're going to fail and that we're going to get called out on that failure. And so, yes, it may seem like, Billy Bob is going to spend the next 4 or 5 months between now and the beginning of the school year not really doing academics, but eventually he will start doing academics again. And most of our teams have now experienced that with a couple of kids. Like I can think of our team at Goleta Valley. We had a student last year that, oh boy, before the pandemic, we're like, this kid, how are we going to help him? It just felt like, it was just never going to get there. And now he's in 8th grade and he's in all gen ed classes, and he comes in and he actually encourages us. Last week, he's like, yeah, I remember that was hard for me last year too. Something about 7th grade. And I'm like, yeah, something about 7th grade, but now, he, the principal is wanting to like create a special award for him of like most improved. We're like, yes, this was a student that everybody's like, we don't know if we could meet his needs. He might have to go to a non-public school. We're like, hey, let's just take a deep breath and let's just do very small, tiny steps. He's not going to want to just play video games for the rest of his life. We promise. Sure enough, he's doing like incredible work, but we had to be willing to ride out through that discomfort. Right. Okay.
So I encourage you guys to kind of just take a snapshot of these 3 things and figure out like, how are we going to start doing this within our team, right? So how are we going to start working on creating this culture amongst our fellow team members? So these are some concrete, or more concrete ways of doing that. So think about how can you apply that?
And it could also be just modeling. Like, for example, I'm not a very good model of self-care. Like I'm horrible. Like I'm one of the worst at doing that. And so now this year, one of my professional goals at the beginning of the year was modeling that to my teams and saying, okay, at 5 o'clock, I turn off my phone. And so I may not get back to you for, the next day because I'm out in the field. And especially now that I'm living in the field. So I literally tell people, if I don't respond to your text or your email, literally, oh, Brianna's the best. She sends me a badger. She actually just stopped even like she would just send a picture of a badger. And then this morning I had from a teacher from the San Ynez Valley, she's like, can you move me up to the top? And she just, last week she sent it twice, and that was her signal to say, hey, move me up to the top of your list of priorities. And then sure enough, I pulled out from where I was coaching for 20 minutes, made the data sheet for her, sent it to her. But I have to model that for the teams that I'm with, to make sure that you guys know I'm not just like ignoring you. And B, it's also us modeling for each other how to have those boundaries. Because at the end of the day, if I croak from a heart attack tomorrow, the SELPA is going to put a want ad out for the next BCBA. But my family, well, most of, except maybe my 18-year-old, but he would too, are really going to be devastated. And so it's super important that we model that for each other. And yes, it means we may not get to the things that exactly the way that we want and in the time that we want, but I had to learn to be brave and say, I'm not gonna be able to be your all at all times. And I'm going to need to prioritize things. And then if you really need that from me, like send it to the top. And no one's ever said like, Rosie sucks. She's told me to like, send me a badger picture or told me to like, send me 2 extra prompts. There's a respect of understanding, oh, okay, she's letting me know this is what she needs from me and that she's not just ignoring me. So this is also part of us modeling for each other, that it's not always just in the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. Any thoughts on that, guys, before we move on?
I have become very selfish. No, I shouldn't use that word.
Self-care.
Good.
No,
Debbie.
I'm not going to be selfish. I'm selfish with people asking me to encroach into my self-care.
Yes. Good for you.
I'm committed to walking an hour a day, and I try to do that 5 to 6 times a week. And what I found with Mother's Day, it spilled over to Mother Day celebration, where I insisted that if I was going to host, it would be done on Saturday so that I could have Sunday to recover, because hosting and cooking for everyone on Mother's Day is exhausting. And I know that I have some family members who are a little miffed at me, but I thought, no, I'm going to be, I have to set those boundaries, and I have to do what's important for me, for my well-being.
Yes.
And like you said, Rosie, you have to be selfish in your self-care.
Yeah, and I think that's for the greater good, right?
It is. It was for the greater good because, right, exactly.
It's the whole putting our oxygen mask on first thing, right? And self-care for one, or boundary setting for one person looks different than it does for another person. Like, it doesn't mean that like we all need to walk, an hour a day. Like, that's fantastic. You know that that's something you need, and that's great that you know that about yourself. And it's figuring out for ourselves, what is that we need that works for us, and then asking for that support or telling people this is what I need, right? To stay grounded and to be able to show up for you, like when I need to.
And
right?
Debbie, what I like about that, you said that you need this for your well-being, but it's not just for your own well-being, because when it's for your well-being, it's going to be for your family and your